Raymond had taken Nablus, he'd taken Beirut, he'd taken all sorts of other towns around, and they were basically guarding Jerusalem from different fronts. And so the fights between the Muslims and the Crusaders are in full effect. And as he's entrenching, or as the Crusaders are entrenching themselves to guard Jerusalem, Salahuddin rahimahullah ta'ala takes a different strategy. Just as he patiently unified the Muslim world under a central power, Salahuddin rahimahullah ta'ala made it a point to capture all the unsuspecting forts. And so he starts to clean up around Jerusalem. So he takes back Haifa, he takes back Beirut, he takes back Nablus, he takes Acre, he takes all of these different places. He captures the forts. And then he patiently surrounds the main army, the main fort of the Crusaders. And in the process, he uses his military genius. So like Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu anhu, if you read about Khalid radiallahu anhu, his main tactic was deflection. So he creates these boogeymen, these deflections in different places that take the army by surprise, and then he's able to move in deeper. He poisons wells along the way. He attacks with small groups of archers, these Crusader bases. And so imagine when you're trying to sleep at night, but then from far away, a few arrows rain down on you. And so what that does is it creates a paranoia amongst the Crusaders wherever they are, that at any point these archers might rain down upon us. And so they have sleep deprivation now. They have all sorts of paranoia and panic amongst them. They never know as they're in those areas where Salahuddin rahimahullah ta'ala has commissioned some of his men. So he's using small battalions to demoralize and deprive them of any type of morale that they're building around Jerusalem, that they're building around Palestine. And then comes the Battle of Ḥaṭṭīn. Now, subhanAllah, as Salahuddin rahimahullah ta'ala arrives, as we know the story, subhanAllah, that Salahuddin is checking the tents of the Muslims to make sure what? Not that they are militarily equipped, to make sure that their tents are lit up at night and that they're praying Qiyamul Layl. And Ibn Shaddad rahimahullah ta'ala, who will talk about his biographer, he mentions that Salahuddin would not miss a night of tahajjud. That this was a man, no matter how busy, no matter how tired, no matter how engulfed he was in the battle, always found his time to turn on the lights in his tent and to pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at night for victory. And this was one of the most crucial ingredients of his success. So Salahuddin rahimahullah ta'ala is making sure that his soldiers are praying and that his soldiers are ready. Under the king of Jerusalem, Lusignan, you have 1,300 of the most skilled knights that will come out to fight the Muslims. Their headquarters had been Masjid al-Aqsa, the destroyed Masjid al-Aqsa, had been the headquarters of the Knights of the Crusaders. He sends his most skilled knights, and he sends 15,000 troops. Salahuddin rahimahullah ta'ala amasses an army of about 20,000 people. And they meet for the Battle of Ḥaṭṭīn. Just like the Battle of Badr, the use of archery gives the Muslims a strategic advantage. And so as the battle begins, the Muslims rain down so many arrows that the army cannot advance in any way, to the point that they say that even an ant would be hit. Precise with their arrows, striking them and beating them back as they seek to come forth. And they rain arrows throughout the day and the night. As that's happening, Salahuddin rahimahullah ta'ala is gathering intelligence from within as to what their weaknesses are. He comes to find out that they're short on water. They're short on water. So what does he do? He sees the direction that the wind is blowing, and he sets the grass on fire. And the wind blows the fire onto them, and they don't have water amongst themselves to put that fire out. And so their army is demoralized. On top of that, remember the true cross that the Persians had stolen from the Christians, and that Herakl had hoisted on his back and put back in the sepulchre and was guaranteed safety by Umar al-Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu. They came carrying that true cross because they thought that if they carried the true cross, they could not lose. Salahuddin rahimahullah ta'ala was able to acquire the true cross from them. And this completely psychologically demoralized the Crusaders, because they knew that they were done at this point. And so the Muslims would come back to Salahuddin rahimahullah ta'ala and they would say, An-Nasr, we won. He would say, not yet. And he would say, until you've captured every single battalion and until you've struck at the tent. We've won, we've won, we've won. And he made sure that they had complete victory. And then he came down and he did sajda to shukr, rahimahullah ta'ala. And it was at this point, by the way, that Reynald de Chatillon, Salahuddin rahimahullah ta'ala, would kill him with his own hand, as he had promised, as he intercepted him before the fall of Jerusalem. And as I said, I'm skipping a lot because I want to focus on the lessons. The 20th of Rajab, and you can look at the date right now on your phone, by the way. The 20th of Rajab, which correlates to the 2nd of October, 1187. Salahuddin rahimahullah ta'ala begins his front on Jerusalem. And he lays siege for 6 days. And then it would be on the 27th of Rajab that he would enter into Al-Quds. And if you remember when we covered Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj, that is the date that many scholars hold, would have been the night of Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj. The night that the Prophet ﷺ led all of the prophets, the Anbiya, in prayer on that miraculous journey. And as Salahuddin rahimahullah ta'ala enters into Jerusalem, you can imagine the emotions of the Muslims that have been subjected to all sorts of horrific crimes before that point. You can imagine the spirit of rightful vengeance. These people beat our children against walls, grilled them and ate them off of skewers. These people exploited and violated our women in the worst of ways. These people burnt down Masjid al-Aqsa, desecrated everything that was holy to us in Jerusalem. And we've been banned. There was no adhan in al-Aqsa for almost 90 years. Can you imagine? Almost an entire century. So when you tell me Palestine is over, the Qadiyya is over, it's not over. Almost 90 years, not an adhan in Masjid al-Aqsa. But Salahuddin rahimahullah ta'ala lives up to his legendary name, Yusuf. And he offers terms to the Crusaders. He offers safe passage. Women shaved their heads and desecrated themselves because they were afraid that the Muslims would do to them what the Crusaders did to the women of the Muslims. We're not like them. We can't be like them. People protected their wealth that they thought would be looted. Salahuddin rahimahullah ta'ala offers safe passage and safety. And on top of that, as they desecrated our sites, he restored their sites and guaranteed their places of worship. Just as Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, when he entered into Jerusalem. Now as the time goes on, I want you to imagine the emotion then, when he brings forth the minbar that was built by Nuruddin rahimahullah ta'ala and installs that minbar in Masjid al-Aqsa. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect it. Allahumma ameen. And I also want you to appreciate that this war did not stop. Salahuddin showed every form of ihsan that you could possibly show. But you know what? The Crusaders launched the third crusade. And they came back. And Salahuddin rahimahullah ta'ala stayed the course. And he kept on protecting it. And this is important that you don't get caught up in a moment of euphoria and victory and think that it's all over. Because it's often then when you put your guard down that you're struck. Salahuddin rahimahullah ta'ala guarded the forts. The Crusaders gathered some of the largest armies, up to 600,000. Some historians even say under Frederick, up to 1 million soldiers to come and fight and to retake Jerusalem. Frederick drowned. Salahuddin rahimahullah ta'ala rose. And he continued to protect. And yes, at times he lost some of the towns around Al-Aqsa. He lost some of the towns around Jerusalem. But he continued to guard the forts of the Muslims. And it was Richard who said that as long as Salahuddin is in Jerusalem, it will never be taken. And indeed it was not taken while Salahuddin rahimahullah ta'ala was amongst us. As we come to his death, I want to mention the name of the man who chronicled his life up close and personal. You keep hearing me say Ibn Shaddad. And this man, his name was Bahauddin ibn Tamim, from Mosul in Iraq. He was a scholar, he was a wise man, he was a poet, a qadi. And the reason why he's called Ibn Shaddad is because his maternal uncles are from Banu Shaddad and he was raised amongst them. So his famous nickname is Ibn Shaddad, and there are other Ibn Shaddads in history. And he gained such prominence chronicling the Muslim world that Salahuddin rahimahullah summoned him from Hajj to come to him. And then Salahuddin rahimahullah took him as a close confidant and a close friend, and ultimately he became one of Salahuddin's closest generals and field commanders, but also his biographer, writing about some of the things that were happening behind the scenes with Salahuddin. He says, I swear by Allah that Salahuddin did not miss Salah in congregation, even in the battlefield in his tent. That he established his Salah in congregation. And that when the nights would become darkest and the people would retreat to their beds, Salahuddin rahimahullah would retreat to his qiyam, even in the fiercest of battles. This is a man who lived in the battlefield, who never had a moment of respite, and always turned back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I want you to think about this. He never actually reaches the threshold of zakah, because he would spend what came to him fi sabilillah. And so he doesn't steal the money of the Muslims, which was common as leaders would enrich themselves on the backs of the Muslims. Salahuddin's goodwill to the Muslims was evident in the way that he carried out his life. And one of the most shocking things that I always think about, the man never made Hajj. Salahuddin never had the opportunity to do Hajj. His whole life was spent in battle. He never got a break to even go and to do Hajj, but look at the status that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given to him amongst the Muslims. He says that I remember times that it would be 3 days and he wouldn't have a morsel of food in his body. A true warrior in the battlefield with his people. 3 days he wouldn't have a morsel of food in his body. And he would often bemoan the lack of response from the rest of the Muslims. And he would wonder, when would the Ummah wake up and meet the challenge, rise to the great challenge that they had? And he didn't want to be seen as the singular savior of the Muslim world, but he wanted to see the Muslim world as saving itself by attaching itself to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and what Allah azza wa jal had made sacred. Ibn Shaddad says, recounts these moments sitting with Salahuddin in Asqalan, on the shores of Gaza. And Salahuddin looking out at the water and talking about his desire to spread Islam throughout the world and hoping that the Muslims would continue on his legacy and hoping that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would give him the ability to spread Islam far beyond what he had done in those moments that he had. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tested him with a fever. He's back in Syria, in Damascus. And for 2 weeks, this intense fever takes him over. And he's only 55 or 56 years old. But it becomes clear that the greatest general, perhaps in the history of Islam, after Khalid ibn Walid, was going to die in his bed the same way that Khalid ibn Walid died in his bed. Despite surviving 20 assassination attempts, despite living in the battlefield, like Khalid radiallahu anhu, who pulled up his sleeves and showed his body to his companions and said, every single part of me is struck. How is it that I'm dying in a bed? Salahuddin rahimahullah ta'ala would die in his bed. And the Quran reciter would continue to recite by him, and he would, as he started to phase into an unconscious state, he would react to certain ayat of the Quran. As the reciter came to, لَقَدْ جَاءَكُمْ رَسُولٌ مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ عَزِيزٌ عَلَيْهِ مَا عَنِتُّمْ حَرِيصٌ عَلَيْكُمْ بِالْمُؤْمِنِينَ رَؤُوفٌ رَحِيمٌ in Surah At-Tawbah, that there has come a messenger amongst you. عَزِيزٌ عَلَيْهِ مَا عَنِتُّمْ حَرِيصٌ عَلَيْكُمْ. He cares so deeply about you. It greatly pains him what pains you. He is compassionate over you. بِالْمُؤْمِنِينَ رَؤُوفٌ رَحِيمٌ. Salahuddin rahimahullah ta'ala would nod. He would say, Sadaqt, you've told the truth. And then when we came to Huwa Allahu alladhi la ilaha illahu, Salahuddin rahimahullah ta'ala suddenly started to engage intensely with those ayat, repeating after the reciter, Huwa Allah al-Malik al-Quddus. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. His face beamed as he took his last breaths, affirming that Allah Azza wa Jalla is the King of all kings, and affirming his tawheed, and he breathes his last at the age of 56 years old in his bed in Damascus, to be buried right next to the masjid that he grew up in Masjid al-Umawi. When he passes away, people could not believe that he passed away. There is a mythology that was developing around him. How could Salahuddin die, rahimahullah ta'ala, as often happens with great men? And the reciters had to remind the people in the streets of Damascus that were wailing in tears and in disbelief and wanted to see his body for themselves, the same ayah that was recited when the Prophet ﷺ died, وَمَا مُحَمَّدٌ إِلَّا رَسُولٌ قَدْ خَلَتْ مِنْ قَبْلِهِ الرُّسُلُ, that Muhammad ﷺ is but a messenger, and messengers have come and gone before him. And when he passes away, they look into his estate, and they found that he only possessed 47 dirhams of silver, 1 dinar of gold, which wasn't enough to even pay for his janazah. Greatest leader of the Muslim world that we know of couldn't even pay for his own janazah at the time of his death, and it had to be taken from his family. The streets flooded as they came out for the janazah of Salahuddin rahimahullah ta'ala. And it's narrated that the people said at his gravesite, "O Allah, as his final victory, as you open for him the doors of Jerusalem, open for him the doors of Jannah. Allahumma kama fatahta lahu abwab bayt al-Maqdis, faftah lahu abwab al-Jannah." O Allah, as you open for him the doors of Jerusalem, open for him the gates of Jannah. Something along the effect to say that he was granted victory here and he did his job here. So grant him, O Allah, what you have promised him there. And they buried next to him in his grave what? His sword. And they said to him, هَذَا تَتَوَكُّ عَلَيْهِ إِلَى الْجَنَّةِ. You will lean on this into Jannah. Use this as you enter into Jannah. SubhanAllah. Born in his mother's tummy as a sword and buried with the sword right next to him, where he was the great defender of the Muslims. And he was buried next to who? Nuruddin al-Zengi, rahimahullah ta'ala. I want to end with this thought. My father was sharing this with me, subhanAllah, and I looked it up. That the French colonialist, Henri Gouraud, in the French Mandate of Syria, in the year 1920, famously walks up to the grave of Salahuddin rahimahullah, and he kicks it. And he says, "Wake up, Salahuddin, I'm here. Wake up, Salahuddin, I'm here." The taunting of the Muslim world, the taunting of our heroes, it's not the first and the last time that we will see it, and they will seek to provoke and incite and awaken the sentiments of the Ummah. And in the poetry of my mother, may Allah have mercy on her, with the addition and with the consultation of my father, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala preserve him, that as the Bosnians were being genocided by the Serbs, يا صلاح الدين قم لن ينتهي المشوار لقد عاث السرب في الأرض فسادا فمن يهب لأخذ الثار. O Salahuddin, stand up because the journey is not over. The Serbs, and in this case the Zionists, have filled the earth with corruption. And so who will stand and avenge their crimes? The invoking of the name of Salahuddin is not the invoking of a god. It's not the invoking of a saint. It's not calling upon a mere mortal to stand up. It's the invoking of our own generations to say that who exists amongst us that will take up that call with the same passion that he had, rahimahullah ta'ala, and through that passion and sincerity be granted incredible tawfiq from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, incredible success, miraculous victory from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And miraculous victory does not come except through sincere exertion. Salahuddin is not someone who woke up and had Jerusalem handed to him. He's not someone who woke up and had greatness handed to him. He worked for it. And so as we celebrate these moments of respite for the people of Gaza and the people of Palestine, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that just as he rose from this ummah Salahuddin, that he rise from amongst us the likes of Salahuddin, and that he include us amongst the likes of Nuruddin and Salahuddin, the righteous mothers that carried the Salahuddins, the righteous men and women on the front lines the righteous scholars that taught in the masajid, the righteous huffaz of Quran that passed on the torch of this deen. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala count us amongst them. Allahumma ameen. Barakallahu feekum. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.